Hello, this is I Do Damage and welcome back to the channel. In this WOLCEN Lords of Mayhem video, I want to talk about my impressions with the game and kind of give a general overview of the game. Before we go ahead and start, I want to remind everyone I do stream on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Also, we have a Discord with over 200 members. The links will be down in the description for all my social media. So, WOLCEN Lords of Mayhem has met my expectations and gone a little bit above and beyond, actually, what I had hoped WOLCEN would be. The first thing I want to talk about is the story. The story in WOLCEN, as I said, met my expectations. The cutscenes were really cool. The maps were pretty cool. The side areas were really exciting. But for me, I was trying to rush through to get to the end game, so I didn't feel that I really enjoyed it as much as I probably could have if I wasn't rushing. Another thing I want to comment on the story is bosses. The bosses throughout the story are insanely hard. There's 3 main bosses you'll fight, and they are a true test of your build. Some people argue they're even unfair because they can one-shot you. Well, that's because the game is trying to teach you to not neglect your defenses. And a pro tip, if the bosses are just simply too hard, don't forget you can go to the main menu and change the difficulty from normal down to story mode. And that will make the bosses a bit more manageable for you. Pretty much the story overall, I thought was pretty interesting. I had guessed how the plot would end after Act 1, so, you know, it's nothing special. But the bosses were really cool. The next part I want to talk about is endgame, and this is really where the game shines, from my perspective. I think they've really handled the endgame well. The way that it works is the progression is pretty much based around projects and mob level. So the way it works, let's talk about projects first, because this is kind of the bread and butter to the end game. When you get here, you're going to notice that you can build up these buildings, you can get buffs, you can get a 5th skill slot, among many other items. I won't spoil it all for you, but there's a lot there. There's even some crafting type stuff, and it's really quite interesting the way it works. So the way it's set up is you have this productivity that you can then level up and become more productive, right? But the way that you actually earn the productivity is you go and you run a map, and then when you complete the map, you'll get the productivity reward, and it applies to your current projects. So that's pretty much the projects. Simply put, I could do a whole really in-depth look into it, but that's pretty much just the surface view of projects. The next progression for the end game comes in the form of these maps that I talked about and expeditions. The way it works is you pick a difficulty, you go in, and if you can clear 3 maps in a row, you then unlock the next difficulty, and it goes up by 3 levels, all the way up to a max level of 187, and clearing all 3 of those, then you'd be fighting the max level of enemies, which is 190. Your character level is capped at level 90, and also all of your skills can also be leveled up to 90. So you're going to have a really powerful build to really push that top end of mobs and get the best gear in the game. That's not it though. The maps also have map mods that you would expect in any other ARPG, Path of Exile, Grim Dawn, anything like that you can apply. You can pay money to beef up these maps, and if you pay 1,000 Primordial Affinity, you can also then turn it into a Wrath of Carousel mode, which turns the map into a timed run. The quicker you do it, the less you die, things like that. You get a score at the end, and the higher your score, the better the rewards at the end. So it's really cool. And then in multiplayer, it tracks the damage done and stuff like that, so you can kind of compete with your buddies if you want to do that mode. And there's also treasure maps and things that you can find that'll then unlock a special map. And there's even uber boss fights that you can use as well. There's really a lot to the end game, and I'm very impressed with it. I think I probably have close to 50 hours in the game since launch, and maybe even more. I'm not entirely sure, but I have a Bleeding Edge build right now that's level 72, I think it is at the time of recording this, and I'm really loving it. I really haven't had this much fun and been this addicted to a game since Diablo 3. So now that you know about the end game progression and the story, let's talk a little bit about gear. Gear in this game comes in an interesting variety in the fact that there's no item sets that you would expect. But I think this is a good thing because it makes you really want to look at the affixes and the statistics on items to actually compare for what's good and what's not. and it really makes getting new items exciting. You really got to try to look for exactly what you need for your specific build, whether it be crit or maybe some wisdom so you can apply ailments, or just percent damage, which usually takes the cake. And there's a lot to it, and it's really cool. And there's even specific stats that you can only get in the Wrath of Carousel mode. So that adds even more to the gear. Pretty much the gear is really exciting, but the one thing I do want to talk about with gear, and this is probably one of my major gripes with WOLCEN Lords of Mayhem, and probably the only one really that I have other than the bugs, but this is when items drop on the ground, it just says what item slot it is. So for example, you'll get an item and it'll say boot, or boots. I would like to know, what are those boots? Do they have ferocity on them? Are they spell-based? What are they? I would like to see affixes on the nameplates on the ground. I think that that's a really important piece of information to give your players. And without that, it kind of feels a little bit less exciting picking up items on the floor. I get more excited when I'm at the vendor actually going through all the stats and looking at the items. Picking them up feels rather lame, and I think if they could look at Last Epoch or really any other ARPG and give us some affixes so we have an idea of what type of item we're actually looting, I think it'll make that looting and picking up the gear feel just that much better. The next thing I want to talk about is skills, and this will tailor into gameplay as well. So the skills in WOLCEN feel amazing. There are a few lag issues I've encountered where I hit a skill and it animates like it's going, but it doesn't actually go. And that can be a little bit frustrating. It's not a major concern for me because it really is pretty isolated and doesn't happen all the time. Skills overall feel great if you're doing like a channeled one or one that you can spam, but if you're trying to combo, like let's say 4 skills, like a 4-skill rotation, it can be a little bit finicky. Back in the beta, they worked on a queue system for skills to where you would have to fully finish one animation before the next one in the queue would start. And they've kind of done away with that, and it does feel better than it does in beta, but it's not exactly perfect how I would like it, but it still feels great. The active skills I feel are exciting with the runes and upgrades. I would like to see a little bit more variance to some of them to make them stand out a little bit more. But overall, I like them. I think the game looks great, feels great, and thinking of new builds and new skills to use together, and then looking at that passive tree and trying to find that really good node, I just love it, man. And I absolutely love WOLCEN. I've been really enjoying my time, and wow, I can't wait till they get all the bugs and stuff fixed. One more thing I want to talk about, and this was really kind of the gameplay that I mentioned, but I want to talk a little bit about the map design. And I don't know entirely how they pulled this off, but it's beyond my expectations of map layouts. Let's just take a step back, and I hate to bring this up, but if you can remember, Warhammer Chaos Bane had different tiles, like maybe 4 different tiles, but it had like, it was the same map. Like you could run the maps with your eyes shut because you could memorize the layout. In WOLCEN Lords of Mayhem, they've done it so it's so random. I don't think I've ran the exact same map ever. It's so random. There are different tile sets, so they'll look similar, like you'll be in the swamp area or like inside the different tiles. You'll notice they look the same, but the layouts are always different. And on top of that, you have side areas and events that are random as well, and it's never the same. It feels great every single run, and this is after at least close to 50 hours of endgame. So I don't know how they did it, but good work, WOLCEN Studio, for that. The random events are awesome, and the side areas are also exciting to go in and see what's going to be in there. Is there going to be a cursed chest or maybe a shrine of greed? I love it. And then the combat is so fluid, except for a few of the latency type issues that I mentioned. I really think the combat feels really nice, and multiplayer really also is where the combat shines, in my opinion, when you get everyone working together and trying to find those synergies. And also, I gotta say, I love how flashy the game is. It looks great, and there's certain areas where I have flashbacks and I think I'm playing Diablo 3. Like, it's that good. I absolutely love how they've handled the gameplay and the map design. The last thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of a touchy subject, but it's builds and build variety. When I first started to follow WOLCEN back in the Umber days, so much has changed. And I remember when it came into the first tech beta, I was sitting there looking at every single class that they would talk about on the passive skill tree, you know, and trying to figure out what would synergize together and this and that. And I really thought that there would be a lot of variety, but the more I've played it and really tried to min-max the endgame build, I'm kind of seeing that there really might only be a few actual viable builds for the endgame. Now, I think there's definitely tons of skills and options you can do, but if you look at the passive skill tree, there's nodes that are just obviously better than other nodes, and you need to take certain ones. For instance, the health nodes, the all resist nodes, you're going to need those if you don't want to die. And there's even more to it than that. Like, for instance, ailments are so overpowered. I don't know why you wouldn't do an ailment build. I don't know. I just think there needs to be a whole balance pass with the game. Either bring bleeding edge down a little bit or bring everything else up to par or close to. I'm not saying everything needs to be the exact same power level, but the disparity is so huge right now that in co-op it's often frustrating playing with friends that they feel like maybe they're not carrying their weight because they're not doing bleeding edge, and then it just can cause for these awkward situations to where it's like, should we just all play bleeding edge then? Or, you know, it's... Anyway, I'm not going to go on about that. That's kind of my thought on builds. I would like to see a bit more variety and a bit more options to open up. In closing, I have to say, WOLCEN does have its issues, and I'm not blind to those. It does have many bugs that persist from the beta, and hopefully will be cleaned up with time. I know it's been a lot of time, and, you know, they're probably out of time as most people would think, but I'm willing to wait. I think once they get all the issues with the server and all these bugs resolved, I think this is going to be a true gem. I think right now for $40, I think you'd get your money's worth, at least from my perspective. I love the game, and as I said, I haven't had this much fun since Diablo 3. Last thing I want to say is, other than the bugs and the items dropping on the ground and a little bit of the clunky combat and the lack of build variety, other than those items, the game is just solid, and if they can focus down and just fix those 4 pillars, I think they're going to have a really solid game. And they've already done really well. I mean, look at their sales, man. They've done really well, and I'm so excited. The wait was worth it to me. Let me know down in the comments. Was the wait worth it for you? Are you playing WOLCEN? Thinking about picking it up? Let me know. Let's have a conversation. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.